Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Trav in the Bush, a bird photographer from British Columbia, Canada, and today I'm going to teach you 6 tips on how to get razor sharp bird photos. Tip number 1 is to shoot at your lens's sweet spot. Every lens has a sweet spot where it's sharpest, and it's normally not wide open. So the lens I use, the Nikon 180-600mm, for that lens, wide open is f6.3. But that's not where it's sharpest. That's your lens working at its maximum potential. Your lens is normally sharpest about 2 to 3 stops down from that. So my lens is sharpest at f8, and a lot of lenses are normally sharpest at around f8. And one way to tell where your lens is sharpest is actually a website that I use. It's called www.photographylife.com, and it has a whole list of different kinds of lenses on there, and you can go on there and look up your lens and it'll tell you where it's sharpest. Now, before you get mad at me, not every lens is on that list. I made a video about this on my Instagram channel. I had tons of people getting mad at me, telling me that my lens isn't there. Sorry if your lens isn't there. But there's a lot of lenses on there, a lot of Nikon lenses especially, and it will help tell you where your lens is sharpest. Tip number 2 kind of relates to number 1 with that sweet spot, and that's to focus at the center of your lens. Most lenses are typically sharper at the center, and they lose sharpness as you go towards the edges. So actually getting the bird in the center of your frame and getting your focus point right in the dead center is going to make your photo a little bit sharper than focusing at the edges. Now there is a sacrifice and a bit of a compromise to this. If you want to get the photo as sharp as possible, you're going to want to focus in the center, but you're going to be losing out on composition. You're going to have to compose in post. And that's typically what I like to do. I like to get my photo as sharp as I possibly can in camera, f8, focusing in the center, and then I'll compose when I go to edit. But that's going to be personal preference and up to you what you like to do. What do you like to do? Do you like to compose in camera or in post? Let me know in the comments. Tip number 3 is another small piece to the puzzle, and that's to not shoot at your lens's max focal length. So for example, if you're shooting with a 600mm lens, try not shooting completely at 600mm. Pull in a little bit, shoot at around 550mm, and that will actually give you a slight edge in sharpness. A lot of zoom lenses lose sharpness at their max focal length, so just pulling back a little bit is going to give you that extra edge. Now if you're shooting with a prime lens, just forget about this tip. We'll move on. Tip number 4 is to use a high enough shutter speed. I have said this in my other videos, and I'm going to keep on saying it because in bird photography, our shutter speed needs to be pretty high. Our subjects are tiny, they're small, their feathers move in the wind. There's so many variables that if you're using a too low a shutter speed, you're gonna go home with a blurry image. You could follow steps 1, 2, and 3 perfectly, but if your shutter speed isn't high enough, it's over. Your image is blurry. It doesn't matter if you're trying to get it as sharp as possible. If that shutter speed isn't high enough, it's not going to work out for you. Having said that, with this tip, I'm not going to give you an exact shutter speed to use because every scenario is different. Depends if you're using a tripod, what the lighting's like. Just for your shutter speed, depending on the situation, whenever you think your shutter speed is enough, raise it up a little bit more. Even having your shutter speed raised just a little bit more could be the difference between a sharp photo and a blurry photo. Again, depending on the situation, whenever you think that shutter speed is right, raise it up just a little bit more. For tip number 5, we want to make sure that we are close enough to the bird. If that bird is far away and we have to crop in on the image, every time you crop in on that image even just a little bit, we're losing feather detail. Even with a high megapixel camera, getting really sharp photos is putting all of these little pieces together. And even every time you crop in just a little bit, you're losing more and more pieces the more you crop in. So the closer you can get to the bird, ethically of course, but the closer you can get to the bird and the less cropping you have to do in post, the sharper that bird's going to be. The closer you are to the bird, the less cropping you're going to have to do and the more detail you're going to retain in the image. And now getting close to a bird is a whole other topic for another type of video that I'll hopefully put up here someday for you. But for right now, in order to get closer to a bird, I find that local parks are excellent. Local parks where birds are habituated are really, really great places to shoot where you can get nice and close to birds. Or another good practice is if you know where birds are going to be, is to show up before they are there. An example of this is shorebirds. If you see shorebirds moving towards you, it's best to go really far away, go down on your belly, sit and wait. Wait for them to come to you, especially with shorebirds, normally they do. If you go to them, they're flying away. And tip number 6 is to keep your ISO low. A lower ISO is going to preserve more detail in your image. Having a higher ISO is going to introduce grain and noise and those types of things into your image. And yes, I've even said it in my previous videos that you can use denoise not to be afraid of high ISOs. That is true to a point. Everything has a limit. And this video is about getting the sharpest image possible, and to get the sharpest image possible is to get it in camera. And the way you're going to do that is with a really low ISO. Like I just said, there is a limit to having too high of an ISO and even mixing that with denoise. An example I'm going to give is this shot of a fiordland crested penguin that I got in New Zealand about a month ago. This is one of the rarest penguins in the entire world, and I knew I was only going to have one shot, one evening to get the shot, and this is where you folks might disagree with me, and that's totally okay. But there was a couple things that just weren't working for me. I was far away from the penguin, okay, which means I had to crop in. It was late into the evening, it was getting dark, and it was overcast. I had to use a higher ISO, and like we've mentioned before, don't be afraid of high ISOs, but this was the image that I ended up with. And we've talked about not being afraid of high ISOs, but I had so many things working against me that once I put it into edit, I had to crop into the image, I had to edit the image, and then I had to denoise the image really heavily. And when that was all said and done, this is what I ended up with. And in my eyes, this is just not good. Yes, I got a shot, but is it a shot I'm happy with? Is it one I'm going to hang up on my wall? No. No, it's not. So to get really sharp photos, you have to put all these 6 steps together to all work as one. Now, if you don't have all 6, that's okay, except for the shutter speed one. You gotta have the shutter speed. But if you don't have all of them, except for the shutter speed, that's okay. There's gonna be some sacrifices, but for this one, I had to crop in very, very heavy. My shutter speed was okay for the moment, but I had to crop in very heavy. It was dark, so my ISO was pretty high, and with mixing all those factors in, it just ended up for a pretty poor shot. So if you want really sharp images, low ISO. Well folks, that's all the tips I got for you today. If you want some more tips though, you can download my free ebook. The link's in the description. It's a bird photography cheat sheet. Like, subscribe, and all that other stuff. And I'll see you next time.